Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the People for Effective Government online event. We're glad to have you. My name is Chris Venn. I'm a PEG board member. PEG is a nonprofit, Spokane-based, nonpartisan coalition. Our mission is to support bipartisan approaches to governing, which are fiscally responsible, ensure an adequate social safety net, and promote a civil society. We've been holding in-person forums and online events for over 3 years. For those who are new to our events, we look forward to having you with us in the future. We're committed to changing the current political climate in which our major parties have become increasingly polarized. We're working to ensure sincere and civil debate about the challenges that our community and nation faces, and about effective solutions to those challenges by providing speakers with information and perspectives on a variety of relevant topics. We're a small grassroots organization working with very shallow pockets. If you're finding these events helpful as you think about issues at the local, state, and federal level, please consider joining as a member or making a donation to PEG. We're a nonprofit relying on membership dues and donations to cover our costs. If you're interested in learning more about PEG and possibly becoming a member, please visit our website at www.pegnow.org. As a reminder, the views presented tonight are those of our guest speakers. Those views are their own. Audience members are welcome to submit questions at any time. Our speakers will answer as many questions as possible before the forum ends at around 8:30 p.m. Please be brief. You can ask several questions, but please submit only one at a time. Please submit them via the Q&A feature. This event is being recorded and will be posted on our website within a couple of weeks. Our topic tonight is a closer look at homelessness. There are few issues more visible in our community than homelessness. Hardly a day goes by without some aspect of this vexing issue being discussed in the media, at governmental meetings, among businesses and neighborhood groups, even over coffee with friends and neighbors. Nearly everyone knows or believes they know something about the problem, but few have a comprehensive understanding of the issue. Housing and Help is a new nonprofit organization working to inform and educate people. They're producing a series of 12 video episodes to take a closer look at homelessness. Two of their principals join us this evening. Gavin Cooley became the city's first CFO in 2003 under its new strong mayor form of government and has since served 6 mayors. As CFO from 2003 through early 2020, Cooley managed the city's credit rating from near junk status to its current AA rating and raised general fund reserves from near zero to over 25% of expenditures. Additionally, he institutionalized fiscal policies that moved the city to long-term, structurally balanced budget and dedicated capital funding. Mr. Cooley is also involved in numerous community activities, including education and policy on homelessness issues and Spokane River Trail acquisition and management. Ben Stuckert was born and raised in Spokane, attending Lewis and Clark High School and Gonzaga University. He spent 13 years in the event ticketing industry, 8 years as Spokane City Council president, and is currently executive director of the Low Income Housing Consortium. He originated Housing and Help project to try to help educate the public about a very complex problem we face in our community today. So we'll start with a short presentation to be followed by questions from the audience. So Gavin and Ben, you have the floor.
All right. Well, Ben, why don't you introduce the material and I'll move to shared screen so that people can see it. Cue that up.
All right. So my name is Ben. Thank you for the intro, Chris. And thank you for People for Effective Government, PEG, for having us on this evening. We appreciate the opportunity. I'm the head of the Low Income Housing Consortium for the last 3 years and really trying to figure out on housing, how housing fits in. And for up until July, I was chair of the Continuum of Care for 18 months, and that's the HUD dollars that flow through our community. we started to really see an increase in homelessness while I was at the city in about 2017. And I think it's been the third rail of politics that entire time, where I think people look at it from a political lens when it should be looked at from a solution lens. So one of the things I think is there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. So about a year ago, I was working with Frank at Corner Booth Media on another project, and we were really digging in one night on homelessness and what we thought the solutions were, what we could do to educate the public. And we came up with Housing and Help and started raising money for it, approached Gavin, because what we were really looking for was who's a neutral party in our community that could act as a host. And Gavin has jumped completely feet first in. And maybe if you want to talk a little bit about why you got involved.
You know, I think we tackled a lot of great issues, especially in the last 8 years of the city. And it was really clear, as Ben said, that this really started to emerge as a significant issue just as we were leaving. And so the tools that we used to do the other things at the city, you know, whether it's a riverfront park or, you know, really getting us on our way to fixing the streets problem, really, you know, changing the downtown landscape, getting the sports complex, you know, and the list just goes on, cleaning up the river, which was an astonishing feat. We used to dump about 80 million gallons of effluent into the river each year. Now it's close to zero. So all those things happen, but on the basis of principles and you know, ways of governing that are, you know, really agnostic across different issues. And so it was clear that about the time Ben approached me on this, Ben Frank Sabota, that the approaches we were using thus far, and like most cities, you know, to be fair to Spokane, you know, just about every city in the country is failing at this, that maybe we could involve ourselves. But as far as my involvement, for me, very much learning about homelessness along the way. This is probably, you know, I know literally very little about homelessness going into this project. So it's been an adventure for me each step of the way, whereas, you know, Ben has a lot of knowledge on this issue. It's been a learning process, which I think has kind of almost enhanced the journey for me, where as I'm doing the interviews and things, I'm actually learning every step of the way. So that starts out with that that metaphor of a journey. Do we want to start?
Yeah, we can show the first little clip.
Okay, we'll show a clip. Take just a moment here to share content. And Chris, do you see that?
From the top of Forester.
Yes.
Wouldn't want to be doing this buried in snow. A little over 13,000 feet. Got an early start this morning, and this is good conditions. I mean, what the heck? Almost there.
The Pacific Crest Trail stretches from the border of Mexico to Canada, over 2,600 miles. What better way to clear your head after serving 18 years as the Chief Financial Officer for the city of Spokane? Although I only made it across California, I learned so much about being alone and vulnerable, having no one else to count on but myself, never really knowing what lies ahead, sleeping on the ground in a tent for over 3 months. That tent became my sanctuary. I'm Gavin Cooley. I got a very small taste of what it's like to be alone and exposed to the elements out on that trail. And it was one of the biggest challenges of my life. But unlike the hundreds of homeless in our city and the millions around the country who battle the elements every single day, I had so much help along my journey.
Sorry about that. Let's see.
Sorry about that, everybody.
From GPS to high-end camping gear to daily check-ins with my family and months to plan. If you are homeless in America, you have very few tools to help you survive and no home to journey back to. And to all of us on the outside of that world, we not only don't understand why the homeless population is larger than ever, but don't know where to begin to help solve it. Maybe if we just ignore it, it'll all go away.
Okay, that's the first clip, and Ben will tell me when to go to the next one, or Chris, you will.
So that first episode's about 15 minutes long, and if you go to housingandhelp.org, you can watch the rest of it. But it really focuses on how did we get here. And last week, episode 2 came out, which was really focused a little bit on Camp Hope, and teases our visit. Part of our trip was to go to Houston. And I think what we really, so it's a web series designed to educate. And a lot of people make documentaries or clips, and I've seen quite a few over my time in Spokane about homelessness, but none of them really have paid advertising. And so part of this was to make sure we were advertising it on social media and really getting it out there. And the first clip has been viewed all the way through the first 15-minute episode 10,000 times. And we're on track on episode 2 to hit that 10,000. But I kind of want to move into maybe a little bit of a discussion. Gavin and I and Frank Sabota and their film crew took a trip to Houston a couple months ago to film the folks down there. And I think I'm going to let Gavin just talk about framing Houston and why we went to Houston, because you've got some pretty good background on that.
Yeah, that's for me. And, I think Ben, he understands a lot of the moving parts of homelessness. But for me to go down to Houston, my initial thoughts were simply, this is the one city in America that is effectively tackling homelessness. They've reduced it about 2/3 over the last 10 years. They went from being one of the worst, performing cities. They were targeted in 2012 for doing a really poor job. And then the HUD came in, gave them a lone executive and really some marching orders that you better do better or you're going to lose your funding. But some amazing things happened about that time. They had a new mayor who eventually became a 3-term mayor, a real policy wonk, not an expert on homelessness by any stretch, but somebody, an analyst in the software industry for 20 years in the oil and gas industry, not a politician, not interested in the politics of homelessness, but really interested in the kind of the technical ways that we can go about addressing homelessness. And then there was a big turnover in leadership in Houston about the same time, which really paved the path for a lot of different parts of the homelessness apparatus in the community, in the city and the 3 counties surrounding, to come together. And ultimately, going down there and looking at, the details behind the governance, the policies, the procedures, the bureaucracy, those kinds of inside baseball governance issues that allowed them to accomplish what they did was really fascinating. And I think, we're looking for empathy on this issue. In the second episode, when we go to Camp Hope, we're looking for understanding also when we're talking about how it all got started. But as Ben says, when we go to Houston, we're looking for solutions. And I don't mean a solution like homelessness is going to go away, but solutions like how we all manage our homes or how we manage our businesses. We find balance and we effectively manage a situation. That's what we're looking for. And Houston is doing that better than any city in America. By far, they have the lowest per capita homelessness population in America. They're the 4th largest city. They went from one of the worst to the very best over a period of 10 years. And there's a lot there. It wasn't by accident. And that's what we went down to discover.
And so if you look at Spokane right now, and you look at the funding sources and the funding agents that are funding the problem or trying to solve the problem, I think you have 8 different entities you could really talk about that have funding authority that do different actions in order to try to effectively deal with homelessness. You have the city council in the city of Spokane. You have the mayor's administration and the staff at the city hall. You have the county commissioners. You have the community health and human services board at the city. You have the HUD mandated board, which is the continuum of care. You have the county human services board. You've also got philanthropy that wants to be at the table and is putting money towards solutions. And then you have the business community. Hello for Good is formed, and there's other business groups that want to be involved. And so you've got 8 funding agencies, and you've got no united plan. And then if you look at federal and state and local funding sources that are going into homelessness, you've got 14 different sources, plus the private funding that are going into that problem. And so I saw somebody at the city about 6 months ago drew a picture of it, and it was the messiest picture we'd ever seen. And so in our research on Houston and in our phone calls, and then when we got there, their picture is really crystal clear. They all got at the table and said, we're all gonna fund towards one solution in the center, which is a community plan. And so those 8 different funding sources in the city, instead of funding in different directions and not towards a central goal or plan, formed one board, and everybody basically gave up something, their authority, and ceded all 14 of those funding sources to that central agency. So they created, basically, we could call it whatever we want, a regional homeless authority, but everybody was on board in Houston. And that's why it's really the first step is just getting everybody to collaborate. There's a line in episode 1 where Gavin's talking about homelessness and how he explains that all of the problems we saw during the 18 years, 20 years that Gavin was at the city, none of them were really a funding issue. They were a let's come to an agreement on what a plan issue is. And I think you could say that on any of the, we just talked about cleaning up the river, and that was a $300 million, the largest capital expense ever. But we did that without increasing the rates, utility rates, and actually stabilizing the utility rates. We decreased them to an increase of CPI every year of 2.9%, where before that you saw 0% increases in election years and 8%, 9% in non-election years in utility rates. So it's a matter of coming to a plan, and that's exactly what we heard in Houston. Was the first step towards anything is the collaboration, getting everybody at the table. Everybody gives up a little bit of power and forms that super organization. And so I think that's really the first part. And then I think one of the other messages we heard really was the economic message. And I think we ignore that in our community. We come back into we're going to spend whatever it takes without a plan to keep people off the streets or to put in shelters. And then the other camp is, well, there's accountability and accountability and accountability. And what we really heard crystal clear, I think, is we're going to show this clip, but it's that you can't afford not to act, I think, is one of our biggest takeaways. And the mayor in Houston, Anise Parker, that started this, is no longer mayor. She was a 3-term, very successful mayor, but the next mayor came in and followed suit and didn't change pace. And I think that's what you see in some cities is you saw a decrease in San Diego in homeless population, but then when the new administration came in, policies changed and homelessness increased. And that's why taking it out of government works too. But what the mayor had was a homeless advisor. And his name is Mark Eichenbaum. He is actually paid for by, was it Shell Oil?
I think he's paid by Shell. Initially, there was somebody in that position initially in 2012 when they began their big move, and that was Mandy Chapman Simple. That was paid for by HUD. And then the gentleman that succeeded her then is paid by Shell or Chevron. Yeah, and that's an important point because it's outside the city bureaucracy. In fact, the city really, except for providing kind of bully pulpit kind of leadership and bringing people together, is no longer in the business.
No, block and tackle for the people that are getting the job done, but are not controlling the policy on the ground. They're letting the plan that was decided by everybody control that. So I'm gonna hit share. Flip number 2. Click that.
And go to start broadcast. Yeah. Clip over to here.
Okay.
Go down, I think, to here. Big screen.
Spokane is where we were 12 years ago.
Right.
What we realized is, looking at every study that's been done by all the cities out there, is that having folks on our streets is costing us a lot of money. It is actually financially conservative to put folks into housing with wraparound support services than it is to have them on our streets.
So it's not, can we afford to do all these things you're talking
You
about?
can't afford
Can
not
we
to.
afford not to?
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. So, I mean, it is costing you more money to walk by somebody on the streets of Spokane who's homeless than it is just to put them in housing with wraparound support services. Your number one cost is going to be healthcare, besides cleaning up the streets, besides police responses, fire responses, ambulance responses, jail costs, shelter costs.
So it's not just the cost of doing something, it's the cost of not doing something.
What we looked at is based on studies done throughout the country, we were able to determine when we started that just our chronically homeless population, you know, that's almost like just 25% of our population to start with, was costing taxpayers over $102 million annually.
To do nothing.
To do nothing. To do nothing. And that is cost in the emergency room, it's cleaning up the streets, it's first responders costs, jail costs, shelter costs. Just to manage the issue is very, very expensive.
Right.
And then we came to a realization that it actually can be fiscally conservative, less expensive, to actually take these folks, put them in Class A, great housing with wraparound supportive services.
Yeah, which sounds almost pie in the sky, but again, it's fiscally responsible. This is the most cost-effective way you can deal with this issue.
You're exactly right. And I think the mayor at the time realized we were like a dog chasing its tail. We were spending millions and millions and millions of every year, and all we had was anecdotal stories of success. We weren't really moving the needle at all on reducing homelessness. And that's because all the money we were investing was going to managing the issue. And it came a conscious decision from our political leaders and from the community to go from managing the issue to actually solving it. So now we smartly invest all of our public resources into long-term solutions to the issue, not things and activities that just manage it.
It's a long-term issue.
You're exactly right.
Wow. I hope you could, Chris, were you able to hear that okay?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
it's good.
Kind of quiet at our end.
Yeah, it's quiet on our computer, but I'm glad everybody could hear that because I think it's really important that one of the last things Mark says in there is what they were spending their money on, which is what you're seeing right now is managing the issue instead of trying to solve it. And, you know, when you're bleeding, you try to staunch the bleeding right away. And I think that's what we've seen really blatantly in the last couple of years in Spokane is the problem's getting worse. And so one day you'll hear about a way out shelter by the Salvation Army. And then the next day you'll hear about an anti-camping ordinance. And then a week later, you'll hear about a shelter on Trent. And we know none of those are long-term solutions. And they're huge expenses. And I just want to real quick kind of point out like how you spend your money actually it matters and why Gavin and I got along so well for 8 years at the city was Gavin came to me right away and talked about budget principles. And, you know, his budget principle, he had a lot of mayors previous to David that really didn't follow any budget principle, which left a big structural gap where your expenses were growing faster than your annual income. And that equals cuts, painful cuts at some point. And Gavin's principle always was you never spend one-time money on ongoing expenses. And right now, there are at least 3 homeless projects in the city that have been paid for with ARPA and other one-time dollars that in January 2024 are going to create a huge gaping hole in the city budget. We figure it's somewhere between 20 and 30 million in the 2024 budget. But if you think about like the Trent shelter, just for example, where they just authorized an annual cost of $6 million in operating costs without even providing any services, which will be another million plus on top of that. And that's annually. So over 10 years, you're going to spend $70 million on a shelter that is not moving you in any direction towards permanent housing. And if Mark's point was in Houston, what they did was by planning, they really focused on housing, and housing is their long-term solution. And so while they decreased homelessness from 9,000 in their pit count in 2011 to about 3,000 in their pit count this year, during that time period that you saw that decrease, they built 8,500 units of permanent supportive housing, and they housed in Houston during that 10-year period 25,000 people. So it was through permanent supportive housing, but also having a housing market that kept market rates low, and they used rapid rehousing dollars and vouchers to house the other people. So Spokane is kind of behind the 8 ball. We're not building but 50 units of permanent supportive housing a year. And we're hopefully soon we'll see rents stabilize, but our rental market is hurting as well. But we're just spending all of our dollars on these temporary solutions like shelters. And I think that's it's just a scattershot approach that's not part of a community plan to get there in 10 years.
Yeah, Ben and I heard down there, they don't even, in Houston, they don't do shelters at all. They feel like they're a waste of time and money. And they certainly don't consider it housing. So when they talk about the 25,000 people housed, that in no way involves shelters, which they just don't do. That doesn't move people towards any kind of long-term sustainability or sustainable situation. But it's funny that every discussion you hear about homelessness involves the next great idea or arguments about how to approach it. So it might be, today it might be about pallet homes, or it might be, about shelters, or it might be about programs with strict accountability or abstinence, or it might be about programs with low barrier entry, or you're talking about the anti-camping ordinance. But it's what we learn very quickly, and for somebody like me that doesn't know a lot about homelessness, is it's not about the ideas at all. It's what Houston did really. That's what everybody wants to talk about. And they want to talk about, the poverty that we're seeing around us, and talk about the frustration that everybody's feeling, whether they're experiencing homelessness or experiencing homelessness through it being in their neighborhoods, like business districts, etc. But in reality, nobody wants to really talk about this because it's kind of boring, but it's about policies and procedures and everybody working together, rowing in the same direction, sharing data, sharing information, sharing a common strategic plan, sharing the same leadership, so that when you go out to do something, you have central leadership. And the examples they would give would be like, as long as everybody was doing their own thing, that's certainly what's happening in Spokane. And these are all good people trying to contribute to the problem. But you might have one shelter down the street that is offering shelter for women with children, and then another shelter down the street with veterans. But that on a certain night, you don't need shelter beds or beds for women with children. You need veterans, or vice versa. And it's a fragmented system actually competing with one another for a shared outcome, but it's not shared. There's no communication, there's no collaboration, and so we've all heard that simple saying that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, but I don't think anybody really believes that getting everybody together under the same roof and rowing in the same direction is the actual answer. That, as they said in Houston, is the secret sauce. And it just cannot be that simple. But I think, as you even enumerated, Chris, in your initial dialogue, the guiding principles of PEG, the things you were mentioning, the bipartisan, fiscally responsible, the safety net, the polarization. That's the things that really kill these outcomes. When you get everybody under the same roof, working together and collaborating, amazing things happen. So now you're into the details that nobody really finds very interesting. Down there, they took their continuum of care, which is mandated by HUD and represents a lot of the services going on, and they created a lead agency called the Coalition for Homelessness. And that became the lead agency. And under that umbrella, the strong mayor, Anise Parker, three-term mayor, forced, using her very strong mayor form of government and her relationships with the business community and other people and organizations, forced everybody under that umbrella. And when you talk to some of the providers, we talked to Tao Costas, who ran one of the largest nonprofits down there, and she was really describing a strong arm situation in which her organization called, it'll come to me, but her organization and literally hundreds of others were forced under this umbrella called the Coalition for Homelessness, that then had a CEO and a governing board and a shared strategic plan. And basically the hammer is, if you don't join this, then you're not going to see the HUD funding. You're not going to see the state funding. So even though the city got out of the business, they no longer did this, the housing, the homeless counts. They don't have a community and human services department or board anymore. That's all under that umbrella. Now that it's all under the umbrella, they're all collaborating. And then a strong mayor can say something like, hey, I want to see homelessness reduced by 70% over the next 10 years or whatever it is. And you reverse engineer away from that. And pretty soon everybody's working towards a common goal, sharing their data, sharing their information, sharing the strategic plan, sharing their resources. And you get those outcomes that Ben was talking about that we're able to get the last 8 years when we were working together. And that's why it's not a money problem. It's a collaboration problem.
So how do you begin to build that kind of collaboration in our community, which hasn't seen a lot of that on a lot of issues, not just homelessness, but
Well, I think first, this web series is about educating people about that.
right.
And I don't think we've had a community-wide education on this issue before, on really what the solution looks like. So I'd say this is the first step. And then as we come present to the community, Gavin and I have been out presenting to other community groups. This has led to meetings with elected officials. And at some point, it is going to take some elected officials to stand up and say, we're leading the charge on this and we're going to do this. Because I think you'll have boards like the city's Community Housing and Human Services Board and the Continuum of Care Board will charge forward. I think you'll see there's been some leadership in the last 6 months shown by the Empire Health Foundation, the second largest foundation in the region, really taking a leadership role. So I think you'll see philanthropy really agreeing 100% with this collaborative approach. I think Hello for Good, we've been showing them the episodes. Constant communication with them about what this means. And I think they really like Houston as well. So I think it's gonna be a lot of education, a lot of grassroots movement towards it. But then I think at some point, a group of elected leaders are gonna have to stand up and say, we're doing this. We're taking, and a regional approach isn't like, I know there's a regional governance council now, but it includes and they talk about how they use it, but it's the mayor, one county commissioner, and that's it. And I think one business got to attend. A true regional governance council includes all the funding entities at equal levels of power and not one person, and everybody giving up their authority on the money too. The part of the way true collaboration is going to work is people giving up their power.
Yeah, Tao Costas that came to me then that ran Search. She was describing it was the biggest nonprofit in Houston, and they were doing everything. They were doing work programs, they were doing childcare, they were doing outreach, they were doing homeless shelter, getting people into housing, doing all kinds of wraparound services. They were doing everything, and they were $1 million in the hole. They were in danger of going out of business. They were doing great work, but not really getting the outcome, the results they were hoping for, not getting that many people housed, not getting that many people the wraparound services they needed to move forward. And so she really described the fear that they had at their very large organization of moving into this new umbrella organization in which everybody was there. And being told that we don't need you to do the housing portion anymore. We don't need you to do the outreach anymore. You're gonna focus on very specific housing issues, and that's going to be what you do from now on. And so no more of this or that or that. You know, they were told what they would be doing, and she said suddenly when everybody started taking their assigned roles and and marching to the same drummer, that people were being housed at lightning speed. She'd never seen anything like that, and she'd been doing it for something like 30 years. I think came to the country in the 1960s, so even longer. And she just said suddenly everything changed once everybody got in the same room and started working together. But that is, it's on one hand, you think, well, it can't be that simple. But when we look around the country and we realize that's the one thing we are lacking, that people aren't working together, that they're not collaborating. And so one of the other cities that was targeted, just like Houston in 2012, they had to do better, they were going to lose their funding, was San Diego. And San Diego had the same opportunity. They hired a consultant, had sent them a consultant, just like Houston. They did the exact same thing. And 10 years later, instead of having a 2/3 reduction in homelessness, they had actually gone the other way. And so when they did an internal audit of what happened, they said that nobody was working together. There was no shared community, outlook or strategic plan. Everybody was doing their own thing, and they'd squandered all the money the feds had provided on their behalf. So even given the same exact resources and the same mandates as Houston, they had the exact opposite results. And the reason they had those opposite results is they weren't able to come together and collaborate and work together. And their own internal audit highlighted that that's exactly what happened. It was just chaos. And that's what we're seeing in cities. That's what we're seeing in Spokane. People arguing about a shelter, neighborhoods arguing. There's nobody coming together on this issue.
They're fighting low-income housing in their neighborhoods right now. I'm going to show one more clip real quick.
Sounds good.
Yep. Just hit the close button.
In 2011, we said that we're going to have a coordinated access into housing. When a person is experiencing homelessness and they enter the system, it doesn't matter what door they go through, whether it comes through the city, the county, Star of Hope, Search, it doesn't matter. The choice will be they'll get housing based on their vulnerability. And the decision was made that everybody has to go through this coordinated access. Housing will be determined based on vulnerability. Vulnerability is most likely to die. Half the people who were involved in 2011 said, well, we don't need to do that. We want to put housing on who's going to be most successful. But thanks to philanthropy, the mayor, the city, and they got together and they said, no, we're going to focus on those who are most vulnerable and put them in housing first. Of course, the amazing part is the success rate of over 85% means it was a really good decision.
Right.
And
so the fear is that would somehow not be a success. These are the people least likely to succeed in housing. Over 85% are succeeding with housing.
And the last thing the Los Angeles Times said is scale. We are the macro houser. That's our system. That's our focus. It's instead of trying to focus on every individual, the service providers are really getting these individuals their help and support. The system is driven toward putting people in supportive housing.
So you keep talking about the system, and I've heard that there's over 100 agencies, for instance, and a lot of other moving parts in the system. And so that kind of collaboration is almost unheard of in any endeavor. So maybe you could just talk a little bit, how did you create that kind of collaboration?
In the beginning, we really started to map. We looked at the resources that are in front of us, and we started to make a conscious decision of being data driven. So I think prior to coordinated access prior to the COC, I think people were emotionally driven, and the person in front of you drove your actions. And we had to really say, we're not judging, we're not judging project A or project B or project C, but we want to make sure that we're efficiently serving people and thinking if there's ways to do it better, because it could help you as agency A, you as agency B. And some of that was having hard conversations about sometimes people did everything. Like agencies did everything. And I think it was having to say, what are you really good at? And how can we shift the things you're not that good at to someone who's really good at them?
So that was our friends at the Houston Homeless Coalition, Mike Nichols, the CEO, Megan, who's one of the geniuses down there that understands every aspect of services in the system.
Oh, and that was Jessica.
Jessica Priam, I'm sorry. And I think what they were talking about was housing. And I think sometimes when people talk about this is housing and help is the title of this web series. Because what Houston really decided, and what the University of Washington, they just put out a book in March of this year called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, is that you have to offer housing, but you have to also offer the help in the housing. It can't just be a roof over your head. It needs to be a roof over your head, but then robust mental health services, addiction treatment services, somebody peer support inside of that housing to really walk with you in your journey off the streets. But that's why it's called Housing and Help. And that's what Houston really found, was if you build 8,500 units. So I think that's really just a good note to end on. The first 2 episodes are up on housingandhelp.org. The 3rd episode should be coming out in the next 2 weeks. And then the 2 Houston episodes will be episodes 4 and 5. And we've actually switched kind of our long-term plans. We raised $150,000 to produce the first 5 episodes and do media buys on that to really increase viewership. But we need to raise $50,000 more in order to finish off. And episode 6, we think after the Houston episodes will be a really good closing. That what is that roadmap for Spokane, and how could we do it here? And what would the nitty gritty of it look like? And how do we keep that momentum going? So you'll have really an episode on collaboration in Houston coming out in a little over a month, an episode on the housing and how that works from our trip, and then closing with how could we replicate that in Spokane and what exact steps can we take. So I'd ask everybody really to go look at the website housingandhelp.org, view the first 2 episodes. And then I'd ask you if you like it, which I'm hoping you will, because I think it's really well produced. I think Corner Booth Media has done a great job, and Gavin's done an excellent job as host. I would ask that you share it with family and friends, because I think if we're all educated about the issue and we're all working from the same page and from the same facts, where we know the 4th largest metropolitan area in the United States is, the only one to show success. It was Atlanta that was put on the same notice in 2011 or 2012 by HUD, and they had 4 years of negative numbers and going backwards, and then they traveled to Houston, adopted the Houston model, and for the last 6 years they've shown progress.
They're down 40%. They're really, as the 2 large metropolitan areas are using the same blueprint. The 2 large metropolitan areas that have succeeded. They stand in really stark contrast to, the cities that we're kind of watching all the time, Seattle and San Francisco and San Diego, and these cities that are struggling. And they both say it's the same thing, that we've been talking about collaboration and coming together.
Structural issues versus, it's not the next big idea. We all want to have that next big idea. It's not. It's about getting all the funding streams together under one roof and making one plan, and having a strategic plan for the region, and everybody giving up a little authority to one agency so that it can all row in the same direction.
And we do need to support the strong mayor form of government here in Spokane, because I strongly believe that's the only way we can succeed. And you have to have that bully pulpit. So, setting aside who is in that role at any given point, as you mentioned, the bipartisan approach, it is, Ben mentioned these 8 entities, okay, that, have to come together. And then there's hundreds of entities, service providers, nonprofits, et cetera, behind that. But to get those, just to get the county commissioners and the city council and the mayor's office working in close collaboration to talk the city into basically getting out of the business of homelessness, to get the Community Housing and Human Services Department to sit down and deliberate over this issue and say, we think we should be out of business here at the city and make a leap over to a quasi coalition for homelessness that, is right for Spokane. You can just hear how difficult that is just from a human nature standpoint. There's fear, and there's naturally fear, uncertainty, risk, all the things that government really doesn't deal with well. I've never seen an organization deal, they are so risk avoidant that they really miss opportunities. So it gets back to your question earlier, how do we support this? We have to get this message out and talk about that kind of formation to bring about these outcomes.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple of questions that have come up. And one, I'm going to start off with one of my own, and that's, you talk about housing people, and we have a huge housing shortage. If we wanted to place the 600 individuals in Camp Hope in housing right now, we couldn't do it because we don't have it. So how do we get there? I'm not sure even if you combined all the funding streams that we could do anything in any short period of time.
Well, I think there's quite a bit of, I think there's some play in the system. I'm going to give an example right now, which is all of the low-income housing agencies signed on to a letter with the city 2 months ago and said, you have the funds through some ARP funds and through the local housing levy that the city council passed in 2020 to put about $9 million into the housing authority's newest project. And that would free up the 9% low-income housing tax credit project for a Catholic Charities project and for VOA to add some housing to their 2.0, their youth shelter. And so that would have created 100 units by the housing authority and freed up the low-income housing tax credit for another 100. So you'd get 200 housing units. The city said no, because we don't think that direct funding, which you're actually allowed to do for the housing authority because it's got special consideration, is how we should be operating. We need to operate like we've always operated, which is RFP, because that's fair to the nonprofits. Well, all the nonprofits, every single one of them signed on to the letter that more housing units are better than less. But the city and the CHHS staff and politicians said, our goal is not to create, and they said this in meetings, I had numerous meetings with many agency leads, and the message was always the same. Our goal is to follow process. Our goal is not to maximize number of units. And that decision would have been different had we had a centralized agency that's goal was to produce more units. So that's just kind of one example I can see in the last few months where if we had different management structure, we would have gotten another 100 units. But it's also, there was a bond that Houston went with. Once they had the plan and decided that it was housing, they bonded some for low-income housing. But they also said, very specifically, shelters are fine, but we're not going to fund shelters. We're going to fund long-term solutions. And the community stepped up and said, well, then we'll fund the shelter system. So some of the foundations that normally might have been trying to scattershot what they funded, fund the shelter system, and the city, their millions of dollars go towards the housing portion. So I think that also, if we focus on not just low-income housing, building more units, which we know we have to, but we also need a better housing market where rents are stabilized because a lot of what these permanent supportive housing units, they're not supposed to be 20-year units. We have, you know, the first permanent supportive housing units that were built down on 2nd Street, right? The Mary Lee is one of them, and I don't know what the other one next to it, the Catholic Charities has. But those are the first ones built in Spokane. And it's been 6 years since they've opened, and you still have 90% of the same residents there because they're not turning over out into the community. And if you have a more robust services inside the housing, but a better housing market outside of the housing where people can go and reasonably stabilize, you then free those units up for other people on the street as well. But Chris, I 100% agree that there's a lot of changes that need to be made. And it's going to be really difficult and a hard task, but I think we can get there if we set those big goals.
It's really strange when you set the goals, and you know, Ben alluded earlier, we had a consultant, a really expensive consultant for the city come in and advise the city that we had to have double-digit increases for the utilities of, you know, double-digit, you know, north of 10% for about the foreseeable future. And Condon came in and basically arbitrarily said it was going to be 2.9%. I came up with an average of inflation over the last 50 years. It was 2.9%. He said, good, that's what we're doing. And there was really no basis for it. But what the yeah, and so what ended up happening there though is when you set that goal and you make it a requirement, not follow process, as Ben said. When you follow process, goodness knows where you're going to end up. It's kind of like a road trip in which you just say, well, let's just go with the flow. You know, you're not going to probably end up really anywhere. You might have a wonderful experience, but you're not going to end up in any particular destination. But, you know, you have to reverse engineer. And I'll tell you, the things that had to happen within the water department to get to 2.9%, we had the head of the water department quit in anger, say we were going to go to a boiled water scenario, said that, you know, this was a disaster in the making. And that went on for about a month of arguing before he finally resigned. And we ended up doing a lot of things to get to that 2.9%. And the technologies we would use to, instead of just having an aging of the pipes, we went in and we did, actually the technology allowed us to send cameras down the pipes, and a lot of things that were scheduled to be replaced were in great shape, even though they were 100 years old. And then we found other ones that really needed replacing, but it was a lot less than what we had scheduled. And our leakage ratio went way down, even as we were maintaining 2.9% and spending way less. But that's just one example. And I guess it gets back to this notion that when you structure properly and you set goals and don't follow process, you set goals and you reverse engineer off those, then the solutions start to come out of the woodwork. You know, and so, you know, one of the participants in the city will have to be the planning department. So you got Spencer Gardner down there recently. He said, we're going to do a 1-year moratorium on the single family designation. And, you know, that kind of thinking is part of it. The planning department, the city real estate department, they have to be part of this process. They have to be under that umbrella to bring solutions. When the school district said, we're going to, you know, we actually came to them and suggested a school levy because of an opportunity with levy equalization. We said this is a good time, and they didn't think they could afford to do all their projects. So the city became one of the first cities in the country ever to say, let us help you out. We have property up in the South Hill for your South Hill school. We got property out at Joe Alby for your Joe Alby school. We got property up at Foothills for your Foothills school. And the city has a lot of real estate and a lot more than what we use there to help them come together, and we gave it free, you know, and the Attorney General said, you can't do that. That's gifting of public funds. And we're like, how can we be gifting of public funds when we're giving to the school district, another public agency? And we backed them off on that. But we had to take that risk and actually, you know, challenge the Attorney General's office to help the schools accomplish that goal. So, you know, city real estate can play a big part in that low income housing construction. And then the people that know what they're doing are in the room, so that you're not planting them all in one place. There's low income housing planted all over the community in disparate places, so you don't have, you know, the NIMBYs pushing back too heavily. And so there's, you know, you have to have some real experts in the room, and then you have to have the leadership blocking and tackling, not coming up with the ideas. Again, I know very little about homelessness. And I would suggest that not many of our political leaders do know any much about probably what I know about homelessness. But if they're good leaders, they know how to block and tackle for those experts that do know about homelessness. And Anise Parker, that 3-term mayor in Houston, said, even to this day, said, I don't know anything about homelessness, but I know how to block and tackle for the people that do, and I know how to put them under one roof to get them all working in the same direction, rowing in the same direction towards a shared outcome. And that's what we need to be doing.
Here's a question from the audience. Could these solutions be overlaid on a city like LA?
I would say yes. If Houston, the 4th largest metro area in the United States, can do it, everybody should. I think LA's got itself in a disaster, and I think they've been spending hundreds of millions, but they haven't been doing it in a concerted effort.
Mary Gassetti down. They've got billions now. They're in the billions, but A, they don't work together. B, they've got about the highest priced real estate in the country. And they've also got very powerful NIMBYism. It's not just NIMBYism, you know, like that we're accustomed to, or even Houston. It's NIMBYism that's extremely well connected and powerful. So I don't envy LA the task in front of them dealing, and they've got a climate. Whereas there's kind of a myth that people, when you do a good job with homelessness, that people are going to come from other areas and flood, gee, if Spokane does a great job, then we'll just attract a ton more homelessness and we'll never get anywhere. That's a myth. About it, close to 80% of the people are from around here in this region, and they've always been from this region, and it hasn't gone up or down. Same thing with Houston. But LA, actually, when you go down to Venice Beach, a lot of those people aren't from that area. They got a different climate. And it's common sense. People aren't going to relocate to Spokane if they're living outside or contemplating living outside. They might consider LA. So LA has a whole different set of issues, and I got to be honest, I feel sorry for them down there. They're going to really have to do something different. But it's still going to start with the same principles, like Ben said: coming together, working together towards shared goals and outcomes, rowing in the same direction. It's got to start there.
Okay, here's another question. And I'll do a follow-up here too. How do Catholic Charities Haven Apartments fit in this scenario, as you saw in Houston area? And
Well,
I guess
I'd
part of
say
that might
those-
be the concentration of,
Yeah.
a lot of different projects in a very small geographic area.
Yeah, so I'd say like Gonzaga Haven is their newest one up on Nevada and North Foothills Drive, and that's an example of not concentrating in scattered site that has really robust services.
170 people.
Yeah, and doing a great job. And so far, the anecdotal evidence is great. The interviews I've seen with residents and the meetings I've had there, it's really heavy on the service end. The quality in the plans I've seen and the staffing levels, that's going to be really robust transitional housing up there for the folks on Camp Hope. The ones downtown, there wasn't any central planning at the time saying where to go. So Catholic Charities bought the land that was available. And that was all around where House of Charity is. And so you have a concentration of different havens all in one neighborhood. And I think you could see that. And I don't think anybody would disagree that it would be better if they were scattered throughout the community. I think that's the goal. And I think that's part of having one central agency. And I think that part of our current low-income housing tax credits that pay for a lot of those units don't also offer money for the services inside. You're expected to figure out how to operationalize those services. Luckily, Representative Chop, he was speaker for 18 years in the state legislature, just passed a great bill called Apple Health and Homes. That's putting capital money towards permanent supportive housing, but also for every unit built, there's going to be money set aside in the operating budget for those services. So I hope that really as Apple Health and Homes grows, we have more robust services, and you're not piecing together the services inside permanent supportive housing. Because permanent supportive housing doesn't mean build low-income housing and try to offer services. It has to be robust services inside the housing. And right now, part of our financing mechanism for low-income housing doesn't allow enough of that. And I think if you reprioritize some funds, you can get better services inside of the housing and do scattered site.
I'll just mention on the, when they talked about the inability to, the affordability, one thing is, although they did pass a recent bond down in Houston, when we asked about how they funded it, what are the revenue streams that the, people of Houston are coming up with, Mark Eichenbaum kind of laughed and said, you're in Houston, we don't, Texas, we don't tax ourselves. And although they have recently, because they've been very successful, agreed to come up with some revenues, most of it is outside revenue. And that's such a remarkably different scenario than, you hear some voices calling for incarceration or, kind of a criminal justice response. And, the criminal justice response, as opposed to the housing and wraparound services that Ben is alluding to, is just, just from a CFO standpoint, we already, more than 60% of our general fund already goes into criminal justice. And if you're $135 a day for jail, that's $50,000 a year. It doesn't even begin to get into other costs of policing, the municipal court, public defender, probation, prosecutor's office, and it goes on, or the fire, it just, and so, and the people that go into that, that's all locally paid. Those are local tax dollars by and large. And so that's all locally paid. And the people that come out of that system are probably less prepared to come out of homelessness than when they went in. So, I mean, talk about just a horrific response. But Houston points out that, Mayor Anise Parker, when we were talking about visiting an encampment, she was saying, look, we really don't allow them. And we decommission them. And, part of their pact with their community is that you're not going to see homelessness downtown. It's not going to be nearly as visible. And when they decommission an encampment, and that doesn't mean, like what we're talking about here, where people are just moved from one spot to another or into shelters. When they decommission an encampment, they have a profile of every single person in that encampment. And they've already done the work in advance before they ever talk about decommissioning, where every one of those people are going. They have a navigator assigned to them. They have housing and services profiled already. And it's a 3-hour operation to load everybody up and get headed out for the housing and the services that have been provided for those individuals. That's decommissioning an encampment in Houston. And at that point, there's a promise from city government and the collaborative known as that Coalition for Homelessness, that you will not see that encampment again. So the business community, of course, when they started to see that these things were happening, really jumped on board. So you got the owner of the Texans and the Houston Oilers and others, not Oilers, Houston Astros and the Houston Texans coming on board, and everybody else kind of
Going back to the Bunk Phillips days.
Yeah, right. But they all jumped on board because they saw a demonstration from the people working with homelessness of, effectiveness. And then they became very interested and very participating in that. So ultimately they estimate down there, it's probably 17,500 was the number they came up with for providing annual housing with wraparound services. And the cost of leaving somebody on the street they came up with was closer to 90,000. Now, I hear a lot of different estimates because that's something I'm interested in. So I go and I look at, different cities and different estimates. And I've heard estimates, ranging anywhere from 30,000 a year, leaving them on the streets, up to the 90,000, 95,000 that Tal Costas came up with. And everybody uses different methodologies. Do you count lost business revenues from people fleeing downtown because of the situation? Or, there's a lot of ways to count it. But in every case, the cost of providing a roof with services is dramatically less than the cost to the community of leaving them on the streets. And that's where that notion of we can't afford not to. And that's just the CFO in me speaking, not not any other part of my perspective on this, just the financial perspective.
All right, let's let Chris get to the next question.
Sure. So sorry if this was answered, but are the vast majority of homeless people suffering from mental health, or is it legitimately diverse?
It's a big number. I've heard
it's
60%.
it's a big number, and I think co-occurring disorders are a big number as well. I think like part of, if you watch episode 1, we talk about the deinstitutionalization that happened in the 1980s. We went from, I think it was nationwide 750. Now I'm going to say this with a caveat real quick, like an asterisk at the bottom. I'm not advocating for creating big bad institutions. I know those didn't work, but there were 750,000 people across the United States living in mental institutions. And when we closed those, we're down to 60,000 people now. And community-based mental health was supposed to be the answer, but it hasn't been the answer. And it hasn't worked currently how it's working anywhere. And you can see that when you go downtown and walk around for a couple hours, that people need serious help. Or if you go to the Spokane jail and you get off the elevator on floor number 3 during a tour, every single person there is completely massively dosed on drugs. And it literally looks like people are walking around, and it's really disturbing. And I asked, the first tour I took of the jail was, what is this? And they're like, this is the mental health ward. And it's an entire floor of the jail. And it shouldn't be like that. And it shouldn't be like people with mental health issues aren't getting the help that they need. I don't know off the top of my head the exact percentages, but we need to fix the mental health. But here's the thing about, and oftentimes when people talk about mental health, they also talk about addiction, because I'll see people shooting up on the street, or when I go visit Camp Hope, I've seen drug use. There's not supposed to be, but it happens. Both those issues need to be solved with a roof over your head. You do not go through addiction treatment and then go live back on the street and not fall back into addiction. It's a ridiculous expectation that you would go through, even if it's inpatient, which we don't have enough inpatient facilities in Spokane. Right now, the wait list is 6 months to get into an inpatient, even if you have cash and you're not paying insurance. But let's say I go to inpatient for 30 days and I clean up, and then I walk outside and I'm sleeping in a tent on the street again, I'm going to use again. Or if I'm going to outpatient at Spokane Mental Health, and I see my therapist, but then I have to go live on a tent on the street, I'm going to have a really hard time developing successful patterns to integrate into the community. We know the data shows that once people receive those, a home, a house, and the services, they're 85% successful. And that's just, so I don't know the percentages, but I know it's much better if you got a roof over your head. Otherwise, it's Maslow's hierarchy. You can't meet those higher needs till you meet your basic needs.
They say in Houston, get people under a roof with those wraparound services, they're still there 2 years later. But a lot of them, I mean, to that question around addiction, around mental health, are a lot of them in that situation, perhaps for the rest of their lives? Yeah, they absolutely true.
Some, yeah.
Some probably a pretty substantial number. So that's built in. The healthcare system, the mental health care system, are both under that coalition in Houston. You know, if you're a Sacred Heart and you've got a lot of beds filled with people that shouldn't be there. That's not the appropriate place. You know, they need to be someplace with those wraparound services with a roof over their heads, but not in a hospital. There's a lot of money hanging in the balance for Sacred Heart not to have those beds filled with those individuals, not to have individuals doing basic healthcare using ambulances, just a regular, medical visit. So, just bring everybody together. You have these synergies that save a lot of money and much better outcomes.
And Chris,
Okay, here's a difficult one. Despite the past, should an informed temporary forced institutionalization program be attempted? Same for addiction.
I'll just say, in Houston, when you offer a shelter, it's, you get like 5% hands going up. When you offer a roof over their heads with services, 95% plus people say yes. So I would just argue that that is a tough question, but it's moot. They say yes. And then when I said the criminal justice system doesn't work, in Houston at least, they would say, well, Nice Parker said, hey, for those people that say no, then the criminal justice system is used. Now, can you use it for a very small percent of the population that are just simply, unwilling to participate in moving ahead? I think you can. I think you have to. Otherwise, you can't keep up the end of the bargain with the citizens and with the businesses that want to see their downtowns restored.
Yeah, and I just say that that's a question for later, that if we can offer those services and build enough housing, we know that works. And then what it's like the carrot stick approach, right? You've got to have a carrot. Like, there's no reason we should be talking about enforcing the sit and lie and sending letters to WASDOT about removing the 600 people at Camp Hope until we've got an actual plan to house them.
They have a camping ordinance in Houston, but they don't use it.
Right.
Unless they only use it when they're offering them an alternative, and that's not a shelter alternative.
And I think they have a no new camping. Like they've said, current existing camps will go one by one. We'll offer them housing, and any new encampments, we say no, but they've got that housing in place. And so I think the forced treatment argument or discussion comes up after we've got a plan to get those people off the street. I think it's a little premature to be talking about it now.
Hey, Chris, this is Eric. I have a question that came on the chat line. So if we buy your philosophy on everything, are our local political leaders on board with the Houston Met? What's stopping us from doing?
I spoke with the mayor and Johnny Perkins, the city administrator, about a month ago, and we chatted about it. And it's been kind of a start and stop kind of dialogue, but my understanding is that they're heading down there in October to Houston. And so I think that's a great step. This is the sooner we get started on this, great. I'm a little worried, and just kind of put it out there for conversation, you folks and the electeds, that they'll go down there and they'll see ideas. They'll say, hey, they're doing this, and they're doing this with decommissioning encampments. So they're doing this with their camping ordinance or whatever. And again, it's not about the ideas, it's about the organization and the leadership. And I hope that's what they see when they go down there.
Gavin and I will be meeting with the city council, I think, once the first Houston episode comes out at the end of October. I've been meeting with individual council members. Commissioner Cuny, I think I heard maybe or maybe not talking about going with the mayor to Houston. I've been talking with other candidates for county commission seats about this idea. So it's part of this is reaching out to the electeds as well. And I'm hoping it catches on real solidly soon.
Can't do it without the county. And so that they're set up, they got that continuum of care that Ben chaired. That a lot of the activities roll through the county, the Board of Health. There's a lot of parts of the county and a lot of parts of the city that have to get on board, and you'd want the valley in there. So, I mean, the leadership, the task for leadership, this is the moment for strong leadership now and well into the future. This is not a short-term deal.
And you don't want to go to your expert staff on this because they're going to say no, because their department might get centralized somewhere else.
And you don't go to even the providers, because
they don't want to change the way they're doing it.
Yeah, they're just human like the rest of us.
Everybody likes the status quo. That's nature.
Yep.
And anything that changes is bad.
No, it's interesting that the homeless population often gets sort of conflated into a single group, and some people say it's vagrants, and some people say it's people who have mental illness. And to me, the best description I've heard was at the first Hello for Good conference. The guy from the Lucky Duck Foundation said there were 3 buckets. said they were the have-nots, the people who had an economic reason pushed them into homelessness. They lost a job or they lost their house or something like that. And then he said the can-nots, the people who have mental health or drug addiction. And then the will-nots, the people who just refuse to, follow civil norms and basically outlaw a group. And I think it's important. I'm wanting you guys to give me feedback on this, that people recognize that there are sort of distinct groupings. People do move from one to the other, I'm sure, from time to time, but it isn't a single homogeneous population out there.
No, and every individual has their story, which is why it takes peer navigators or housing navigators or, I remember about 10 years ago, I was listening to a story on NPR, and the last homeless gentleman that was living on Times Square had found housing, and they'd been working on it for 7 years, and each individual homeless person had their own social worker, and those social workers only had a caseload of like 20 people, so 20 homeless people were their caseload, and they worked with him, and they worked with him for 6 years until they finally got him housing. But it's because every individual has different needs. And then I just really encourage everybody to go to housingandhelp.org and watch episode 2, because I think the couple that are interviewed, they have their own story. And I think it's really hard to watch that and not understand that people are individuals and they're all members of our community. And then I guess the third just quick anecdote I'll use is a couple I met last week at Can't Hope. And both of them work full-time. Their rent doubled over the last year, but they speak Russian. And so they went to the Way Out shelter that the Salvation Army runs, which is more of a transitional shelter that has hefty services and is a really good reputation with the homeless population as helping you find housing. But they didn't have a Russian translator, so they sent them away and couldn't help them. So they ended up at Camp Hope, and the question at Camp Hope was, how do we find them a translator so that we can get them, they're both working full-time. To me, it's just heartbreaking that we live in a community that people are working full-time but can't afford rent in our community. And so I'm really hoping Spencer and Steve McDonald, who have been working really hard on housing issues down at the city, just keep pushing forward. So I guess that's mine, I think there are different buckets, and I think everybody's an individual and has their own story and reasoning.
But the will nots, those 3 buckets make a lot of sense to me too. But I think the will nots bucket is just based on what Houston is saying, based on what Atlanta is saying, is much smaller than people think. It's much, much smaller. And but that's a great way of describing it, I think.
It's smaller, but it's the one that gets the most noticed. It's the one, and I wouldn't want to be a business owner with 4 Haven projects right around within a couple blocks. It's
No,
tough.
but the city's known for years there should be garbage cans every 30 feet down there, and there should be porta potties down there. Like my office for the Low Income Housing Consortium is right next to, in between House of Charity and one of the Havens in a Catholic Charities owned property. So I'm down there. When the news happened and a gentleman got shot, I think it was 3 weeks ago, literally my office window was where the shot happened. So I'm down there every week, and if you were walking through that to go to work, you would be so frustrated. But you also cannot find a garbage can in that entire neighborhood. And the city knows that. And there's easy things we can do too to clean up the environment so that, and I would be so frustrated if somebody pooped on my doorstep, but we know what the solutions to those are. And we need to mitigate problems, not just to solve them, but to mitigate it so everybody's not so amped up and angry and we all want to feel safe. we all want to feel clean. And there's things we can do really quick, and everybody knows that we should have done it years and years ago. But it's easier just to keep that area really dirty and then say, oh, this is so horrible. And everybody gets amped up and angry and we make it political. It shouldn't be. It should just be about how do we fix this situation?
I mean, imagine how it's working now. I mean, we've got the 7 council members, the upcoming 5 commissioners, the mayor and her staff, and everybody is just responding, you know, kind of ad hoc to all these things that come up as they come up. And none of those people that I just listed are remotely experts on homelessness. You know, contrast that if you had a coalition where you had a CEO like Mike Nichols that we saw in that last clip that, you know, was a CEO, and he was a CEO type of, you know, business guy throughout his career. Cisco. Yeah, he's a food distribution guy, you know, and knows a lot about that, but he's a CEO, and he and the mayor and, you know, they admit that, you know, they're blocking and tackling for these experts. And imagine if the experts suddenly have eyes on all these issues that are coming up all the time, and the people blocking and tackling for them are the mayor and the right-hand person to the mayor, who is paid for by, you know, the private sector, working with the mayor full-time, eyes on, and the commissioners blocking and tackling for them, and the city council members blocking and tackling. They're now exhibiting leadership on behalf of the people that are actually full-time, focused 100% on the homelessness situation in Spokane. That's such a remarkably different dynamic than what we have now. And I think we'll have the same outcomes Houston had. And I think the city itself could do much better than Houston, do much better than Atlanta. We're smaller, it's more manageable. I think we have a more homogeneous population from a political perspective. I think we're willing, you know, we're kind of a common sense group of people and a size where we could still come together on something like this. And so, you know, it is about organization and coming together and marching in the same direction.
Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, just kind of follow up on that. You know, we've done forums before on building and housing, and we've learned about zoning issues and regulations and stuff like that. How much would this group, how much power would they have over it? Could they stop NIMBYism? Could they, I mean, I guess I find it hard to believe that some political leaders will, you know, if the consortium or whatever you want to call it comes up with a path and says, okay, we got to do this. Are the political leaders, does the group have the power, or do political leaders still get to step in and, you know, placate or whatever? I don't know if I made that clear, but.
Well, I think so. I think so. Performance really does shape policy.
Yep.
If you start to demonstrate that you're effective, then suddenly everybody's blocking and tackling for you. The citizens are blocking and tackling for you.
But, you know, King County created a regional authority, but they didn't cede all of their power to it. So I think you're seeing the struggles with an improperly formed regional authority over in King County right now.
They pass a tax. Amazon says we don't trust you to spend the money on their own. Yeah, doing their own. Right.
Like on the own, not part of the regional homeless authority. So I think you could see growing pains like that. But I think the minute you show success, and if you showed on year 2 that you're seeing a decrease, I think all the politicians would back it up 100%. And I think the sell point to a politician is this is the third rail of politics, right? You can do no right. You absolutely can do nothing right in this situation if you own it. You'll win, because that's what actually works in other cities. And so that's what the job of, I think, the education campaign and the community's job is, to convince the politicians that, hey, this issue is a political hot football. I think that, like, the mayor beat me running on homelessness in 2019. I think she's found out last pretty clear. It's It's gotten worse. And I think the clearest thing, if I were a politician, I'd be like, oh yeah, I don't need to control that money or decision making on this issue. Let's turn that one over to and it's a win, right? It's the right thing to do, but it also gets the political hot football out of your hands, because if you continue to control the narrative of it, if you're a politician, and you continually are making the wrong choices because you're not an expert and you're acting from a control standpoint, it's going to continue to be a losing issue.
Yeah. And so could this be done by referendum, or, I mean, is there any, let's say we have a few politicians that don't want to get on board. How can you get this done, or can one local leader essentially veto the idea? Or could they stop
but
it from happening?
Jim West, mayor we had back in 2004, had a lot of experience, and he pointed out that if you ran on an issue and you made it really clear what you were running on, that and the population knew what it was. Condon did it with utility rates,
Right.
Which we talked about tonight. If you run on that issue and you make it really clear to everybody that for the first 6 months, nobody can stop you. Nobody can stop you. They'd get crushed. And because that's what you were brought in to do. And there was no clarity, other than to say, hey, I'm going to fix homelessness. There was no clarity on the what or the how, in the last go round. So what really needs to happen in this election upcoming is a really clear articulation of not just fixing homelessness, but the what and the how, the details behind it, and really explain that to the population. And then the person that gets elected on that very clear platform will have amazing power to execute, but has to hit the ground running because it's a short fuse. You basically have 6 months, 180 days to get that right.
And you can get anything done.
Anything, if you do that. And of course, lobbying in advance, as Ben has been saying, working with the potential county commissioners and, really working those relationships, the relationships with business. We're really lucky, this Hello for Good organization, they didn't have that in Houston. They had to earn it. We've already got it. All you have to do is demonstrate that you're going to really have some good outcomes. And I think that's already coming together in a really meaningful way, and has most of the major business leadership already lined up and just waiting for an answer. In the meantime, they're doing symposiums and other things and hoping somebody will come up with an effective approach to dealing with homelessness. But they're really in a holding pattern and just waiting for that kind of leadership right now.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Guess we've just about 8:30 and we've reached our 90 minutes. So on behalf of the PEG board and our membership, I want to thank you guys. It's a great evening. Appreciate your thoughts and like the work you're doing. Appreciate your willingness to spend a Wednesday evening with us. We also thank the audience for their participation, and they're very much a part of the work we do. A video of this evening's forum will be posted on our website within a couple of weeks, so people can look at that. And I'd also encourage them to look at your episodes online. I've watched both of them and they're great. So I think they're very helpful, and looking forward to the new ones. So
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sure
You bet.
appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Good night.